All right, so this is not this is methods. It's all. Spotlight for everybody. No one's still joining. All right. Next up. So, methods. Last time we were talking about finding stuff. Ooh. Fine.
Sorry.
Looking at this. Oh, they should not have connection issues. Okay. Okay. Back to purposes. There. Where's data collection analysis? Yes, that's what we need to talk about. Thanks. Cool, cool, cool. All right. Still have plenty of coffee. That's good. This. All right. Boom, boom, boom. Boom. So you got about what, about 6 minutes.
All three branches of government. It took all three branches to put me and Steve in prison. Legislative, executive, judicial. And what we have right now is a house controlled by
Too sweet. All right. 2 minutes. Oh, there's chat. Purpose of research, planning and research idea. Okay, purposes of research, planning research idea. What were we looking at next class? You answered my question already. Excellent. Gonna be this will be a fun one because what I'll do is I'll start trying to get you to look at things like I do a little bit. Sorry. That comes with its own problem. Now, what it is I'm going to show you some stuff because it's depending on what you're looking at.
Okay, I was making sure my microphone was muted.
Yeah, here I can mute it. Boop. There you go. And that one, I guess, isn't coming through, but I'll go ahead and mute it anyway. And so, depending on what you're looking at, you can have the same information and see multiple things all at once. And so, as you're doing that, you can start to see how things kind of stack together. You can pull something different out of it. It's the same kind of concept as I think I remember talking about Descartes here. I like to talk about him here because it's kind of a central idea behind the statistics if you really get into it. It's that in the pursuit of one question, the answer that was received was not related to it, right? That one was one trying to understand what existence is, and basically confirmed that I have doubts, but he's able to leverage that into those things exist. So therefore, logically, maybe I exist, right? Same kind of thing here with what we were doing last class, because I had you looking at a couple of different things, but I want to see what kinds of things you guys were taking from it. So we'll deal with actually had last thing said. Research, planning. What else were we looking at last class? I pulled in some data over the last couple of classes on what kinds of topics. Had you do an assignment on
missing pins.
Okay. What else did we look at?
Their ages, their race, where they're from.
Patients. Miriam and Tree. There we go. All right. I'll give her a second. I'll catch up. It's still a little bit early. This is only a minute in. I started pretty heavy. Sorry. We'll slow down a little bit. Audio accompaniment. She's got it. There she is. Okay, she's got it. Excellent. All right. So methods class. We were talking about what we were looking at last class. Purposes of research and planning research, that kind of thing. Put that up there. So it might be from my perspective. Teaching, purposes of research, planning, that kind of thing. There you go. We got that part. We also hit the sex offender registry. Okay. So that's one of those things that's kind of fun because depending on how you look at it, you've got a couple of bookends to a couple of different things here. When you start thinking abstractly about the different relationships between these things together, right? That's predominantly going to be between here and here. So if we start thinking about the things that connect between those two topics, you start seeing that there's going to be a lot of different connections to a lot of different things. We're trying to make a connection here for some type of purpose. And there's a few different purposes we could have. And so this is, you're right about the purposes of research. I was kind of looking at that at the beginning because I can't remember if we talked about that. Research itself serves a number of different purposes. Anything from, what is it? Trying to remember what the book gave you. Probably something like this: describe or explore, maybe explain, and then usually get down here to apply kind of thing. Okay. Explore, you don't know exactly what it is, you're trying to figure it out. It's always a good one. Describe, you've started to figure something out. And so here's what it is, maybe, right? Explain, here are the relationships between things and how they work. Apply. We're going to make a change to X and see if it affects Y. And so it's all about getting it more towards something that moves, right? So as you learn this stuff, half of it's how to break stuff down. Half of it's learning how to build back up, but we don't focus on that as much because it's really hard to do. It's going to take us most of the time just get where you can break stuff down. And so as we're looking at the connection between missing kids and sex offender registries, what are some of those things that they connections there? Are there any connections? Ooh. What connections should there be between sex offender registry and missing kids? I don't know. That one sounds really awful, doesn't it? Right? Can't really make that connection. That's why it's so awful. It's like, yeah. You see what I'm doing here, right? Yes, you do. But it's not for the purpose that you think. It's got nothing to do with people themselves at all. Okay. So we can connect the people we wanted to. That's going to be a lot harder of a problem because if we want to really do that, you got to make those connections at the individual level, meaning you'll have to start looking at, okay, who's where at what times, who has the possibility to cross paths with who in the time frames that people went missing kind of thing, right? And then how many people aren't going to be on that registry because they're good predators. It's like, that's the bad thing with this field. If you run someone who's good at what they do and they do something bad, they're indistinguishable from anything else. Correct. So we can connect people if we want to. That's a really hard one because that's, again, one of the most variable things that we have in the world, people, right? There's a whole bunch of those. I don't think we're supposed to get into their actual behaviors in their life, and that's kind of what you're starting to get into here. So what else could we be looking at?
Location.
Mm-hmm. Location. What about location?
Well, if you know there's more like potential abductors in a certain, like a sex offender in certain locations,
Mm-hmm.
then you can like look at, okay, who's in this location and how many sex offenders are there here?
Potential abductor. Potential target. Okay. Then you have information about the locations themselves. Yeah, you start getting into proximity, victim, and opportunity. But you guys are still thinking too grounded in reality, right? Because when you think about that, you might see faces, right? That's how I do it. Anytime I start thinking about it, if I'm thinking too close to people, I actually see faces. I start thinking about the issue, that kind of thing. We don't want to look at faces. Let's deal with the places thing. So the way that we kind of do stuff in our field when it comes to like the research side, there's a few different ways that we do it, but they largely fall into a couple of different types, right? It's like people, things of that nature. That'd be like organizations, entities, things of that nature, right? We've got places that can be anything from your level of measurement, like as in counties or states, or even down to the micro level where you talk about building types, that kind of stuff. Parking lots, that's where you'll find most car break-ins, that kind of stuff, you know, that kind of thing. The other side that we kind of do here a lot are crime events themselves. And so we look at the research that's available on the field, they largely fit into those three categories. Of course, there's, considerable overlap, and if you're doing it right, you'll get all of them to work together in the same kind of thing. This one right here is one I want you to think about, places. Okay, so these could be potential areas where we start seeing stacking of people missing or stacking of sex offenders or something like that. What I was thinking about is places to disappear. You've got a group of people who want to be found who aren't. You have a whole lot of people between these who we don't know anything about. And then we have a group of people who we know who ideally kind of want some anonymity in life. Right? Of course, there's going to be some boundaries there and where they can go. That's something that we have to take into account too at some point. But from an initial outset, that's what you start getting at. It's like, what are you trying to get at? Try to abstract it out to where it's something that's procedural in nature, but identifies maybe a new aspect of it. This is actually within our field. This has been something that's been going on for decades. People who focus in on one of these types and at different time frames of theory development, that kind of stuff. Different ones, different types of research take the forefront of the field. But as you start typifying this, you start looking at those locations that people are disappearing and start to stack up. Then what you should start looking at, okay, we've got some measures for ages of people, races, sex, that kind of thing. So it's like, okay, so we start to identify those patterns across these groups. And as you increase the number of groups you're including, because that's not all the people who try to disappear, it's a good start. You start to get where you can typify locations. In this case, where is it people are going to disappear? If you start looking at the available data, basically we start getting at to, as you probably dial down to neighborhood level at some point, if you have enough accuracy in your data, meaning they give you actual home addresses to these people or something of that nature, which to some degree they do. But some of those are missing too. And so that adds in more error. So that's kind of what that one does, right? You get to see a little bit of how that one works. If you guys want to run with that one, you can. I've got that one starting to queue up. I need to go back through your individual stuff so that way I can start pumping you guys information on that if you want to run with those. Let's see here. The next thing I needed to pull up, chapter 1, exploration. Here's the purposes of research. Talks exploration, description, explanation, application. And so it's literally just that. We don't know what we're doing. Okay, we've started to figure something else. We're starting to describe it, right? In that case, what is going on where people want to disappear? Don't know. So let's start to describe where it's at, start to get to that. First, explore. Some of that's going to be in that research process itself. And that's when you get into, I think it couldn't be here. Yeah, the process itself. So here's that process. Here, I do not. I'll share that on the screen. Boop, boop, boop. So this is in chapter 1, where I start to talk about the actual process itself. And somewhere we talked about this, but I kind of want to show you it now that we've been dealing with something. So as you're starting to deal with anything in particular, you have to deal with concepts that already exist related, right? We started dealing with missing children, we started dealing with sex offenders and that kind of stuff, right? To some degree, we might have had an idea when we get started. If it's exploratory, basically, that's basically trying to figure something out. As you develop and you start to look at how these things are measured, to some degree, that's going to dictate what measures you can use. To some degree, you can play with those a little bit, depending on what's there, or if you want to go get your data yourself, right? So you have to determine how it is you want to measure those things. Those two stages are the most important. At conceptualization stage, you're identifying when you use a specific term or you're dealing with a specific issue, what does it actually mean? Here's a full definition of it, right? All the different things that people have touched and they called it this. Operations. That'll be in the methodology section. This is actually what we measured when we measured this. It's going to be this question, these responses coded this way. That kind of a thing. Assuming the data doesn't already exist, that means you've set up a series of questions that have maybe some specific responses in place that have, well, maybe numbers attached or something like that. So we can measure those things out. I'll show you a little bit how that works as we start getting into that kind of thing. Observing, that's just collecting the data. So if you're using data that already exists, you don't need to observe anything, you just need to download it. That's the easy part. Analyzing, that's part of this. Part of it is in the statistics or in the logic between, if you're doing qualitative, as you're coding things and breaking it into chunks, it makes logical sense. Same thing with the stats side. As you're choosing which analyses to do, it makes sense based off of how you have it coded, what it's shaped like, those types of things. And then once you've got that and understanding of it, ideally you'll move to this stage. Usually most you'll see in like research articles, like policy implications, that kind of thing is academia. We just before the idea, you see what takes root, that kind of thing. All right. Reviewing the literature. I probably should start talking a little bit about this. I know you guys have done this to some degree, but it's always good to kind of do it. So in terms of looking at literature, you can do this for other classes. In here, did I show you libraries website, that kind of stuff? Sometimes I'll do that. Doesn't sound familiar. It does sound okay, good. Don't need to do that. Basically, whenever you read a research article, there's a few things to read. Of course, start with the title and abstract. It's not going to tell you much, right? That first section of any article you read, the introduction / lit review, if they actually title it that, basically all that does is that's your conceptualization section, where you've got them talking about, okay, when I say these terms, here's the research that's been presented on it and what they include in those terms, right? You keep reading. After you get through that section, it moves into, well, your methodology. It's this class. Here's what we actually measured. And they'll go into pretty good detail for that kind of stuff. And it will, let me just grab one for each other. Let's see here. I just open up anything in the old Google Drive. We'll say Drive. Oop. My Drive. We're gonna go under that one just titled research. Doesn't look like it. We'll just take one of these. Grab that one. Let's see here. Oh, looks to be the most recent one. This one's on fear of crime. Abstract, right here. Tell you some of the keywords for it. Right? Here's where it starts breaking into the history of it. And it'll go on for a couple pages. Okay. Comparison, because they're changing some stuff here. So they're just talking about methodology. New questions here. Here's some of those questions that they're piloting. Results. Now there's a typo there. That's funny. And so they're just applying the results because this is one of those stages where it's to some degree exploratory. They're trying to figure out if we change this, what happens. Right? If I go to a different one, we'll say gender difference. This is an older one, right? Same kind of setup. Defining fear. Here are your concepts. So we're dealing with this and this. There's 4 strategies involved that explain why there's differences there. Here's the data that we actually collected, right? Here's what we actually measured, right? Here are some of the responses, that kind of stuff. And so they literally give you the roadmap for doing it. And they'll give you the numbers, that kind of stuff. We'll get into the numbers in here though. So that's how that stuff runs. Right here. When you have one that's close to your topic or anything that you're trying to work on, we talk about triangulation. You know how to do that, so we don't need to go through that. You start looking to see what places they're pulling on from what things. That'll also start to identify theory to some degree. Theory is more abstract. That's we start getting at here. Here we're dealing with a specific issue. This is more theoretical. It starts to go into that crime in places kind of thing, right? It says, ask for help. Yeah. From their research proposal, we don't need to talk about that too much because it's basically the same kind of thing, just walking back through it. The only difference is they attach budget stuff and schedules. But if you're doing secondary, it's pretty quick and easy. Okay. Foundations here, chapter 2. I'm going to move pretty fast through this because most of the stuff is based on theory, and this isn't a theory class. So if you had theory, great. If you haven't, basically what you need to know from theory is there's a whole bunch of theoretical lines. They're always in development because some of them are being touched actively at any one point in time. Really a whole lot I need to tell you about that. Not really. I mean, okay. Cannot settle debates on value. Whatever problems. Basically, what right here is whenever you start to get into this, the biggest thing you have to do is specify a question that you can actually test. Right? If you're going to start getting into methodology and theory, theory itself is a series of concepts and propositions. Talk about concepts already. Those are those things that whenever we use words, it's what we mean, right? If I say, what would be a good example? I'm trying to put one. Okay, well, strain theory. Okay, what exactly is strain in strain theory? Right? What are the things that create it? What is it? What does it do? Right? Those are all going to be theoretical things. As you get into it, if you're going to test strain theory, you're going to have to specify what those things are, what they mean, that kind of stuff. If you have a bad question, it's something that isn't testable. You have double-barreled questions. You have questions that basically don't tie into the issues to where it's measurable. You know, example, what constitutes a good parole officer? Good. It's like, yeah, that's not necessarily the case. Or be like talking about efficiency and effectiveness, right? What are the differences between the two? You don't know the two, you can't test either one, right? There's a bunch of stuff like that. When you get into it, regularities and exceptions, we already talked about that, so I'm going to go pretty fast through that part. Causation. So that's when you start getting into the scientific method. How much have we talked about the scientific method itself? A little bit. Okay. So what is a scientific method?
Hypothesis and it runs down.
Yeah. So that's the whole process that we're dealing with in this class. Basically, what you start getting at is it's a way to start getting towards more objective. What's the word I'm looking for here? Objective understanding of things. So, you think about education throughout time itself. Largely, it's going to be philosophical in nature, right? You're dealing with these huge philosophical questions, that kind of stuff. So, within the last 100 years, we really started getting into stats pretty heavily, right? If you start looking at that, when you start dealing with people in general, usually the question asked is how warm is the room or how cold, right? There's an objective measure I can get a thermometer out. There's also the relative nature associated with people and be able to get that in a way that's unbiased without it being me, because I've got to go, it's you. And as we do that, we can get different information that's a bit more objective. If we're doing it correctly, we'll follow the experimental method. That was one that was developed within the last couple 100 years kind of thing. Experimental method. We'll start talking about that a little bit in here. We talk about the experimental method in here? Okay, we'll talk about that now. So this stuff that we're doing is more cross-sectional in nature. You have two types in terms of crime or time. Cross-sectional and longitudinal. So this one has time involved. This one does not, right? So most of the stuff that we're grabbing is sex offender registry. That's for right now. That's active right now. That's not last year's data set, right? You can grab data sets across time and sew them together to get longitudinal, maybe. But most stuff that we do is cross-section. I sent out a survey. Here's what I found. with one-time survey. If you're doing a little bit better, you'll keep up with the people. And you'll break them into different groups. We'll just use 2 groups here for scientific experimental method. So you got them separated into 2 groups. One will have a, let me say, one's an experiment, one's a control. Right? And so depending on exactly what you have set up, you'll have groups here. It's group 1, group 2. You measure here. And you measure here. So that way, whenever you actually look to see if what you've done had an actual effect, you can test. Okay. What are the differences between these groups at the outset? You can control that if you want to. You can then test to see, are there differences between the groups at the end? And are there differences between the groups across time? Right? And with those 3 measures, you get, does this thing do anything positive or negative that's statistically significant and different from this thing? Now I can tell a difference in something. And I can know what the difference is, because assuming my group is large enough for both of these groups, and I follow the proper procedures, those groups will be essentially statistically the same. Get a little bit closer to saying that this is actually what caused it. Think about its development in terms of probably the easiest way to identify would be the vaccine processes. Think smallpox and cowpox, right? How did we figure that one out? You guys know that story? Guy noticed, farmer, doctor, I think, noticed that those who had cowpox weren't catching smallpox when it was going through. Can't remember if he infected himself or one of his kids with cowpox and then purposely injected them with smallpox after they'd gotten better. That'd have been a death sentence. They lived. Hey, gotta start towards vaccines now. Why? Sorry to do that thing. This is the basis of most of our knowledge today. Starts very small, builds very quickly. Okay, so they're trying to get to causation here. This is the only one that actually gets causation. This is the one where you can tell these differences. The cross-sectional stuff doesn't get to causation at all. We're making inferences. We use the word explain. We don't use the word cause. That's why, right? As I'm looking at age across this cross-section of 1,000 people, I can see that those who are older take longer to heal. They're less apt to fight. Whatever it is we're looking at. Okay. Those who are younger in that group are more apt to fight. Okay. Does age cause it? Maybe. I don't know. I can't tell because I'm not watching them across time to see as if they get older, they start wanting to fight less and they heal slower. I can take the time to do that though. Right? Same kind of thing. Just comes out in a little bit different way. Not as strong as this one. This one, though, is much cheaper, much easier. So we do this a lot. Okay. And that gets you a little bit about independent variable, dependent variables, that kind of stuff. This right here, that's your independent variable. Whatever you're measuring at both times, that's your dependent variable. That could be something like, we're going to test your math skills today. So we're going to do a math test to begin with, some training, and then we're going to do the math test at the end, right? Okay, we've talked about those already. Idiographic, this is nomothetic. Basically what that means is case-oriented versus variable-oriented. One of those will have a lot more cases, not very many variables. The other one will have a lot more variables, not fewer cases. That's got to do with this thing right here called N, your number, If you have too many variables, you'll overspecify the model. You have too many cases. Essentially the same thing. Everything becomes statistically significant because you got enough stuff in there to tell everybody apart. And so it's kind of a little bit careful thing figuring out your bandwidth there. Okay, we've already talked about deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning. Qualitative versus quantitative, we talked about too. Qualitative, not numbers. Quantitative, numbers. There's times and places for both of them. They best work together. Okay, theory and objectivity. You know what theory is? Objectivity is something that we try to get at. I'll show you guys a clip at some point in time with my favorite video clip about objectivity. It's hilarious. Okay. Objectivity, independent of mind, not utilized. So whenever they say objectivity in this field, to some degree, people reject whether or not there is objective reality. That's not so good. We use intersubjective agreement. So that's that agreement reality stuff that they'll talk about. I don't know if they talk about in this book or not. But yeah. Several of us agree that something exists, we treat it as objective. Okay. So as we're talking about this thing, you're thinking about it, you're probably thinking that there are some potential problems throughout a lot of this stuff. And there are. For example, as we're talking about just the experimental method, right? If I test you over here and I give you a test something over here that's something similar, what are the odds that you've gotten a little bit better with this practice run? Right? That happens. There's all kinds of potential problems that are going to underlie these entire processes. So to some degree, as you're doing it actively, you become more aware of those. Here, as I move into objectivity and intersubjective agreement, probably the big things that you want to talk about there are reification and deification. Reification is where you start to treat these abstract concepts like real things. That'd be this, an abstract concept. Tied into reality to some degree, but is it a real thing? And what's real? Right? And so reifications where you're taking some abstract concept and treating it like it's real, and you shouldn't. That's like what would be a good example? If I said, there's two things came on. One of them is we'll say something that exists but doesn't exist. Concentrated disadvantage. How's that? Right? That's a theoretical concept in one of your social disorganization lines kind of thing. Basically what it means is that as disadvantages stack, boy, do they stack up, and it tends to cluster in certain places, certain groups, certain times, that kind of thing. They do. The fact is they do cluster in that way, and it does make things very, very bad. And that disadvantage there is real to some degree, and it's going to be worse because of the stacking of things there. But that measure, that thing we deal with that we call concentrated disadvantage, is an abstract concept, right? And so it is what it is, I guess, kind of thing. Deification is where you treat it even beyond that. That's where you start mixing it with other things that you don't quite get it. They don't talk about that. I do. They treat it like gods. That's where you start talking about ideologies and stuff like that. Hypotheses and paradigms. Hypotheses. Specific, testable, right, from propositions, right? So usually how these are set up is you'll have a research question, and you're going to be fairly open in terms of what's the relationship between these things. Your hypothesis. Item 1 and 2 will have a significant degree of association, or item 1 will have a significant and positive effect on item 2, something like that. And so it just runs like that. Paradigm is more of an overarching scheme through which things fit. Yeah, this is where you get into the heady language of structural, functional, it's all that kind of stuff. I try to ignore that stuff. That's me though. It's very important because it's a good way to kind of structure how the different theories fit together, the different I guess you'd say, larger scale theories fit together and how you want to operate them if you're going to try to merge, that kind of stuff. Okay. Here's what I talk about: three main elements: conceptualization, operationalization, observation, right? We've already been talking about those. We've measured concepts, we've gotten where they're measurable, and we're going to go and look. Here they mentioned Sean McKay, Crime in Chicago, concentric zones. That's actually not Sean McKay, that's Parks and Burgess. That predated them. So I'll tell you a little bit about that, and then we'll see how it goes from there. We can get this one knocked out entirely. So, how many of you are familiar with social disorganization theory?
Heard of it.
Okay. So whenever you take theory, social disorganization theory comes out of Chicago. You're talking right around the biggest work's going to be Sean McKay. That's going to be I want to say 50, but I'd really look at this. They covered about 3 decades worth of data. It's like 30s, 40s, and 50s or something like that. Building out of Chicago, that's the University of Chicago kind of thing. Building out the work of the people who got there before them. One of those groups, Parks and Burgess. Parks and Burgess are the ones who came up with the zonal hypothesis. That's what they're talking about there in terms of concentric zones. What they were looking at was Chicago. You remember it's going to be late 1800s, kind of early 1900s. Most everybody travels by boat. You don't have cars, that kind of thing. Especially have cars, but most everybody travels by boat because it's easiest. Chicago has a big pier. People come in, just like in New York, come off the pier. That's going to be in the industrial district right after that. So you're right off the pier because that's where you're going to do all of your manufacturing, all of your shipping, and that kind of stuff. So your housing in the immediate area is not going to be good. It's going to be poorer in nature. As people are coming off the boats, they found housing wherever they could. It's not going to be the good stuff. And as that happens, crime increases because you have a new population, all the cultural conflicts that are associated with such. Parks and Burgess, what they did is they started mapping out juvenile delinquents. And they noticed that, hey, when we look at where piers are, you can see a wave where it's like, okay, the areas themselves are kind of dilapidated, not in the best of condition. There's a lot of crime here. Zoomed a little bit further out, it moves away from the industrial to, just kind of the substandard housing, not quite the dilapidated housing. And then you move out a little bit better, you get a little bit further, it gets a little bit better. So you finally are outside of the city itself, you're in the suburbs. And so as they were charting those, you could see it's like those bandwidths for the kind of nature of those areas to some degree correlated with crime, juvenile delinquency. And so as they're charting that out and following longitudinally, they did that. They followed them for decades. They're able to chart out and see that, yes, as people immigrated, you have all those crimes that take place as they're socially disorganized. Within a generation, what ends up happening is organization and assimilation takes place. As that happens, some people are able to get the resources to move out of those dilapidated areas. Whenever they do, guess what? They leave crime behind, right? If they don't, within a generation, and they're still in those locations, their children do not commit nearly as much crime. And so over time, that assimilation process was taking place, right? That's more of Sean McKay, that assimilation process. That's going to be social disorganization. That's going to be invasion, succession, and dominance, right? The concentric zones actually is Parks and Burgess. Okay. Deductive, inductive, we've already talked about. They're just kind of going through that again. Whenever they say grounded theory, they're talking about one that's inductive in nature. So it starts with data or information, that kind of stuff, that kind of effort, exploratory in nature and building upward. Ideally, if you're looking at it, it's two sides of the ladder. Keep working, it's an engine, that kind of thing. Let's see here, it talks about field research and survey research. Basically, we start getting at it. Survey research is going to be more data-oriented. Field research, not necessarily. Start getting more towards the interviewing side. But you can still quantify that stuff depending on how you have it set up. Cool. Discussion 2. If you were a researcher, strength, inductive or deductive? I don't know. Okay. Crime's a social problem. Don't care about that. Don't care about that. Policies take the form if-then statements. subjective to empirical test. That's something we don't do very well. There's one of the later chapters we'll talk about program evaluation, policy review, that kind of stuff. We don't do a whole lot of that. That's going to be because those people who are doing those types of things aren't necessarily involved in these kinds of processes from the get-go. And by the time they need any type of assessment, evaluation, or anything like that, welcome to the nightmare. You got to go and find out, okay, what is it you say you're doing? What is it you're trying to do? How are you doing it? What is it you actually do? And does any of that stuff align? That's kind of what you're running into there. Okay, next up. Federal government grants. Don't care about that. Okay. Chronological evolution. Here's where we're starting to talk about what I was talking about earlier. Here's where they're starting to get off into some different areas. This is going to be more, to some degree, prevention oriented, also going to be bounded locations, that kind of stuff. Is what they're getting at here. They start talking about urban transition zones, the physical environment, that kind of stuff. Defensible spaces and CPTED. That's crime prevention through environmental design. Basically, what you start getting at is, okay, on one side, we have everything that's going on. You start getting off into the applied side, you start moving over here. A lot of it's going to be architecture, that kind of stuff, whether you're talking about city planning or you're talking about building architecture for some of this stuff, right? Crime prevention through environmental design. If I'm dealing with a neighborhood that's got a problem with people driving into the neighborhood and burglarizing it during the day, easy way to change that is I'm going to cut off a few streets that join up into that neighborhood. So that way I control the number of access points. I'll also change the flow of the traffic in the neighborhood to make it a little less straightforward. Like Chicago, it's on a grid system, very easy to navigate. If you go to most any moderate sized city, you go to their nice areas, well, those road patterns get all squiggly. That's why. So that way, if you're not from that area, you're not familiar with it, you can't burglarize it as easily. You'll get lost. That's why. You don't realize it's there until you realize it's there, right? And you won't necessarily realize it's there unless you're there for the wrong purpose, kind of thing. That's kind of what's going on with that. That's just one area, though. There's a lot of different areas. Ecological theories. This is, again, that's going to deal with that perspective thing. So ecological has to do with the environment itself. So you've got locations, that kind of stuff. Most people think about hotspotting. Ecological theories. Basically, anytime I start thinking about that, I start thinking about patterns, crime patterns, and that kind of thing. That's going to be how people interact with the environment and how everything transpires. So think about it. You move through your day in a certain pattern. There are certain places you go with regularity. Everybody does. Some of those places have more people than others. And so we have some stability in how people move. As that, we can start to figure out where crime takes place. That's basically what they're getting at there. As you're doing that, you can start playing with the factors that reduce crime. Okay, and that's that one. So that one's pretty straightforward. Now let's see what's up next. That's chapter 2, chapter 3. Like I said, we had been talking about this stuff. I just didn't go about it in a way that once you've done it, you look at it a little bit different. And as we start moving into some of the analyses and that kind of stuff, you'll start seeing it differently. It's almost like stepping back and like literally if you were dealing with the issue, stepping back and looking at it like you were trying to figure out what the table of contents is to whatever it is you're reading, kind of thing. Because that's exactly what it is. Okay, this is ethics. So this is where we need to have some fun conversations. We'll only get this one started. Yeah, all of the things associated with trying to learn, and then everything associated with ethics and ethical behavior, especially if we're trying to learn something. If I said the Hawthorne effect, do any of you know what that is? Okay, so the Hawthorne effect is was discovered by I can't remember the industry. It was manufacturing of some type of industry. They were going in to evaluate the workers there. They announced there was going to be an evaluation. Productivity skyrocketed during the evaluation. People were watching, so they're working there. That's the Hawthorne effect. So anytime people have an idea what you're watching for, they change it. So just letting people know what you're watching changes things. Sounds like discussion about life. Okay, So what is right and wrong from an ethical standpoint in a place where they can't determine whether or not right and wrong actually exists, but it's all relative in nature? I don't like it. That's why I don't like that. In some degrees, I take the standpoint that those things are very real correlates. This is really difficult. What's the value of the knowledge of the information gained? If I said, come on, I've heard other people talk about hypothermia. How did we learn how to treat hypothermia? By freezing people to death, right? That was a Japanese, if I remember correctly, is most where a lot of our information comes from there. Torture. If I said, what is the relationship between cultural opinions between the Koreans and the Japanese right now? Some of it's going to be related to that kind of stuff. It's going to be related to war, right? Not going to be good. What's right and wrong there? What's the value of it? If I said pain tolerance tests, we need to test to see what someone's tolerance of pain is. That way we know how hard we can push someone. Do we need to know how hard we can push someone? Maybe yes, maybe no. If we're getting ready to go into a war, wouldn't it be very useful to have that information? Might save a whole bunch of lives. Okay, now you got to pit all of those potential lives against the one that's in your hand right now. Got a whole lot more difficult than, okay? Basically what this chapter does is explains why we have the Institutional Review Board process, is the IRB. Basically what that is it's a panel of people from, all institutions have them. Basically anything that has any type of research will have an Institutional Review Board. They'll make sure that we abide by federal policies, practices associated with research because of the problems we've had in this field. There's a few big studies I want to talk about. The first one is probably the one that's not talked about nearly enough. The one that's talked about too much is the Stanford Prison Experiment, right? That's because you got someone who's kind of twisted, who's running. That's really the one that should be talked about more is the Milgram Experiment. Okay? I can't remember what talks about it or not. Milgram Experiment. If you want, I can get you a PDF for it. Basically, what it is it was. I think it was in the aftermath of World War II, if I remember correctly. I'm a researcher. I've got a person in the other room. They're going to be answering questions, right? As they get an answer wrong, your job, you press a button, give them a little bit of shock when they got it wrong. Every time they get it wrong, the next shock has to increase by 1 increment. The thing goes all the way up to, what was it? Caution, risk of death, or XXX, or something like that. Okay. Where do you think people stopped? Most of them didn't. That's one of those things. It's like, you got to think about it. The person who went through this, they thought they killed someone in the other room. A lot of people did. And if I pull it up right now, because I'm sure I have that one in here. Hold on. Milgram. Let's look up this right here. Oh, because I know that one will be in there. Oh, I can't find it. I'm gonna have to pull it up somewhere else. Because it's got a breakdown for the decision points, because they did it methodologically. So they'll show you just how many times that person had to get shocked. See if I can find it online. Because it's going to be like, okay, here's rank 1. Here's, and it's going to all the way down to whatever this last deadly one is. And it'll have them broken into sections where it's like minimal risk, something like that. And it's literally labeled on it, right? Then it's going to be, moderate, and then severe electric shock, risk of death, right? When you look at those cut points where people said no, most of them went down all the way down to here, right? Huge percentage of them went over to here. Only like maybe a couple, I think, stopped before they got to the dangerous territory. When you look at the language from it, here, I'll actually see if I can pull up Google Scholar. We'll say right here, Milgram Experiment. Give me the actual sort by date. Oh, you're not going to let me sort by date. You're just going to put it in one of those. Original. And you're just giving me a bunch of stuff on it. I've got it somewhere. I know it's in my email minimum. But it's got a nice breakdown of it. Let me put this up here. Boom. Good golly, Wikipedia. I hate Wikipedia. Is it going to give me the chart in here? It probably won't. Those sons of guns. Here, archived. That'll get it there. Milgram. That's where they break it down across what types of people they are. Right there. There you go. Breakoff points, slight shock, 0. Intense shock. You had a few people cut off here. Extreme intensity shock, a few more. Oh, yeah. At that point in time, what they heard whenever they elicited the shock was silence. There's your psychological distress. That's one of the reasons why it fits into this. What we learned. This is how far people will take it. If they don't know, they should know what the danger is, but they're not really thinking about it. The imposition here that was being placed on them was a researcher saying, no, the study must continue. It's for the sake of research. This isn't like it's your lives on the line, which it is in the war. So imagine how far that goes, right? Very, very, very valuable information. Very dangerous. A lot of problems with pulling this information out. How do we do it without causing harm? That's why we have the IRB. We'll pick up with that kind of discussion next time. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this class. A little bit more book stuff than just dealing with the number stuff. We'll get back to the numbers next class. I didn't have enough time to download all the data sheets, so I like to show you as I start putting them together. Cool? All right. Well, I will catch you all on Wednesday. With that, have a great day, and I'll see you then. How do I stop sharing? Over here. All right.